Private climate estimates have increased to 310 billion, with corporations accounting for the largest share at about 40% of private climate finance. But if you think about a lot of where that funding is going, it's to the mitigation side of the equation. In fact, I understand that only 4% of it is currently focused on the adaptation side of the equation. But then if you pivot and you think about how much are we investing in water? Like, where is the water being spent? Or money on being spent when it comes to water? And in the water sector, development assistance spending levels average just 14 billion. So it just shows you the big drop-off when it comes to what we're spending on climate mitigation and climate, and the role that companies are playing in this, and what we're spending on water, and what we're doing to build water resilience in these same areas. There's been a recent study by the World Water Council that has said that investment requirements of the sector, water sector that is, are 200 billion per year is what's needed. So you can see we have an absolute massive step off of what we're actually doing versus what's needed. Public sector finance and philanthropy is not going to be enough to do what we need to achieve here. And we therefore have not only the imperative, but the opportunity to apply some of the innovations that we've been seeing in the climate space on mitigation to water. And this was one of the energizing aspects of a relatively new coalition of leading companies called the Water Resilience Coalition that has identified innovations in co-financing as a key pathway or a key strategy to realize our 2030 ambition, collective ambition, of having positive water impact in 100 water-stressed basins by that year. So we're really excited to have this conversation today and to really look at the best thinking and the best pathways for scaling some of the financing that's needed around water. And with that, I'm going to hand off, I believe, to...
Thank you, Jason. Indeed, the needs are huge, as you mentioned. Investment needs in the water sector, also to make it climate-proof, actually. The water supply systems, water infrastructure. In the Green Climate Fund, just as a matter of introduction, we are the largest climate fund established under UNFCCC. So currently, maybe it will be, of course, appear quite small, those numbers for our private sector colleagues, but of course, under the UNFCCC umbrella, these are quite important numbers. We have already allocated funding of $11.3 billion to mitigation and adaptation projects from the funds that were made available by contributors to the GCF, and attracted more than 30 billion of additional co-financing, including from private sector. Coming to the issue of adaptation, which is forgotten in many cases, and something that tends to be really in the shade. By design, our fund needs to keep balance between mitigation and adaptation, so 50-50 in grant equivalent terms, and we are pretty close to that. We are now at 49% for adaptation and 51% for mitigation, and also we are capital agnostic, and we have all range of instruments for us, which is also quite different from other climate funds. So we can do grants, loans, guarantees, equity, and we are trying to use this whole range of these instruments in our projects. So coming back to water, this is actually part, we have in total 8 result areas, 4 under mitigation and adaptation. So water is under the health, food, and water security umbrella. So far, we have invested $1.3 billion in 89 projects and programs, which attracted 2.5 additional billion of co-financing. Initially, now coming to a bit the question of evolution. So how, at least in GCF, the water projects have been evolving. At the beginning, of course, we were mostly working, especially on adaptation side, with smaller projects, which were grant-based. Just to give you a few examples, for example, we had a project in in Ethiopia, which was supporting local communities, including in irrigation, for example, using solar for pumping, water pumping. Also had two quite similar adaptation projects in Jordan and northern Gaza, which of course one of the most water scarce territories, and where aquifers that they have, coastal aquifers, are badly depleted. So basically our grant-based funding helped them to use wastewater and water reuse in irrigation, which actually relieves some pressure on aquifers. Now coming how we are actually trying to work in the paradigm shifting manner. We also recently published our water security guide, which is basically a guidance for. We work through accredited entities, so we make our investment through public and private accredited entities. So this guide helps them to design projects, paradigm shifting projects, and we have two main paradigm shifting streams. One is on the demand side, so help to manage, basically have on the demand side promote water efficiency, water conservation, and one on the resource side, so help to protect water resources in an integrated manner through IWRM practices. So through these two streams, we are now trying to see how we can attract private sector finance. And just one example, and maybe I will have more time towards the end to talk about more, but recently our board approved a project called Climate Investor 2, which has our 145 million of our grant-based funding, which will attract more than $700 million in private equity. And this project is through our private accredited entity called FMO, which is a Dutch entrepreneurial development bank. And I hope that I will have more time to talk about it towards the end of the session. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you. I'm going to be the least sophisticated portion of this panel. So my name's Emily Krebs. I head up ESG for the Americas at Deutsche Bank, and I'm here to bring the private sector voice for this conversation. And my prompt is to discuss the trends in sustainable finance, which is a broad term, but as it relates to water, the private sector is relatively immature, but we will hear from some organizations affiliated with corporates who really are leading the way. And I'll explain why that's the case. So if we sort of back up and say, where are we in the sustainable finance evolution? If you look at how sustainable finance has come, we had in 1999, the Dow Jones Sustainability Index established as a screening for companies that are doing the right thing from a sustainability lens perspective. And we've had corporations that have been reporting on their sustainability behaviors and investors who have been proactively reviewing those and making investment decisions based on that proactively. And then we've seen that evolve, again, from the investment lens of investors engaging companies and either setting up their own labeled funds, and those have started to take off, and then regulators taking notice, and then market participants or facilitators like banks saying, well, how do we start to issue labeled products for companies and have ESG labeled bonds or KPI, key performance indicator labeled transactions and such. And it's really only been in the last 4 and 5 years that we've seen a market develop in the banking industry of ESG linked and labeled products. So the corporates and the investment funds are arguably a lot farther ahead than the banks and financial institutions in the realm of sustainable finance. And so if I look at sustainable finance from a banking lens, most of it is looking at GHG, greenhouse gas emissions, and the transition component of the Paris Agreement and getting to net zero. So when we talk about water quality, so whether we're talking about water safety, water resilience, water access, a lot of that will fall under adaptation or risk mitigation with respect to very specific companies. So that starts to come back. If I look at it from a banking perspective and a company evaluation perspective, it either falls into a project finance. So when we look at executing a specific project, are we looking at risk management around water? So is it in a flood zone? If we are looking at a road project, have there been appropriate sightings done and such? But we are not at the point from a banking perspective to say, are we looking at the water-associated risks? Now, that having been said, our corporate counterparties, who we'll hear from, are thinking about this, particularly if they're in the FMCG, the fast-moving consumer goods space, or the agriculture space, or even the health products space as well. So as a market or capital facilitator space, we are certainly behind the curve. So when we talk about, in these hallways and the government negotiations, where is sustainable finance on water and water resilience? We are behind the curve. And this is why it's really important, to have partners like the CEO mandate and the Green Climate Fund really pushing us to the table or having that innovation come to the table. So I just want to be very, very clear on that front.
Great. Well, thank you to our keynote, setting the stage from a corporate, a public sector, and a private sector lens on investing in water. And now we're going to turn to our business partners of the Water Resilience Coalition. And I believe Jason is going to be the first interviewer. We'll have 3 rounds of interviews. 6 companies are online to share with us their investment strategies in water resilience. So I'd like to invite the panelists to take a seat over here. Jason, you can stay. And I believe that we have Una joining us from Starbucks, and Lorena joining us from FEMSA Foundation to be interviewed by Jason.
Great to see you guys online. I hope you're all well. Familiar faces. So, Una, I think you are going to start us off here, and I'm just been thinking of Starbucks as such the innovator and pioneer in this area, and I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about how your investment approach is unlocking increased financing for your water resilience strategy and perhaps your sustainability strategy more generally.
Great. Yes, thank you so much, Jason and the team, for having Starbucks join. For those of us who may not be as familiar with Starbucks, we are one of the world's largest coffee chains with over 30,000 stores around the world, and sourcing coffee from every corner of the world. And we're really pleased to be here to speak to you today about how you can use balance sheet cash for good and the history that Starbucks has been on in terms of pioneering in this space, looking at different ways to help achieve our 2030 targets. And Starbucks has really been on a journey, I think, for some time to really reimagine the company that we want to be. And one of those core commitments is to really become a resource positive company, giving more back to the planet than we take. And we recognize that to achieve something like that across our material areas of focus of climate, water, and waste, it's really, really hard to do that on our own. It's also really hard to do that simply depending on just corporate programmatic dollars or philanthropy funds. It's really a unlock for us when we do it in partnership with others and when we use different types of finance instruments to achieve that. So for those who may not be familiar, Starbucks was one of the first corporate companies to actually issue a green bond several years ago. And since then, the total bonds have been 3 separate ones, all focused on different initiatives that will help us with meeting 2030 targets at the company. This includes everything from investing in our greener stores model to sustainable coffee farming, as you can see in the beautiful Hacienda Alsacia behind me in Costa Rica, as well as looking at how we can improve farmer livelihoods. And most recently, the last green bond issued was over $1 billion. And it's something that we've been able to build a really strong business case around, that the investments that we make in sustainability are good for business, they're good for people, and they're good for the planet. And similarly speaking, this is really how we've started to look at how we work in water, which I think, as Jason and others have just stressed to you so far, has been significantly lacking in terms of the type of financial support that's needed to be able to address the global impacts that we're seeing and the disproportionate impacts. We know that the biggest impacts of climate change are going to be felt through water, and they're not going to hit everyone equally. So we really, really want to start figuring out different pathways to work on that. And as mentioned in the previous session, we worked really hard, especially with organizations like WWF, to evaluate where are the biggest risks in our supply chain and in the communities, in the stores that we serve. And that helped us identify a list of high-risk basins that we're now ready to tackle work and projects in collectively, largely using mechanisms like the UN Water Resilience Coalition, but also thinking about how will we funnel funds together so that we can really accelerate action. And not only will that include programmatic dollars to NGO partners like water.org or WaterAid, but it really needs to look at kind of bigger opportunities for us to start filling that gap that exists. And this is where we were really excited when we were approached by Water Equity to explore an opportunity to invest in one of the first ever water asset managers to look at how balance sheet cash for good can achieve the kind of impacts that we really need towards 2030, and then globally with the commitment that Jason just mentioned to work in 100 basins around the world together. And when exploring this opportunity, I think we've been on a journey together now for over 14 plus months. We are, doing our due diligence. We are looking at how the high-risk basins line up with where Water Equity plans to invest. We are evaluating the potential returns and how we can also utilize those to help fund additional projects in the future. We're making sure geographically we're aligned. And we're making sure that impact can be measured and truly accounted and reported against. So leveraging tools like the WRI volumetric methodology. So we're really going deep to explore and evaluate this as an opportunity to help us with meeting the progress towards our target, as well as being able to do the collective good that we all should be participating in. So this is just one example in our toolbox of ways that we plan to meet our targets. And I'd be eager to talk to others who would be interested in participating in more co-financing mechanisms, because we really cannot do this alone. So I hope that helps, Jason.
That is wonderful. It's very insightful. And the leadership has been very apparent to those of us within the Water Resilience Coalition, because we've seen how many of the member companies have been learning from and drafting off of your leadership on this topic. So moving from one hero and pioneer to another, Lorena, hello. Good to see you. So Lorena.
Hello there, Jason.
Good to see you. So as the director of the FEMSA Foundation, can you talk a little bit about how you're bringing innovations in financing around water for your water programs in Latin America?
For sure. Thank you for your question, Jason. And to put you all in context, the FEMSA Foundation is the corporate foundation of a 130 years old Mexican company in the retail and beverage industry. And what makes us special from our beginning is that we committed back then to generate in pair social and economic value as well. And in our water security strategy, we have innovation at the heart of it. We work with innovative finance jointly with technological, institutional, social, environmental, digital, and governance innovation to accelerate access to safe water and sanitation for all. And I would love to start explaining the size of the challenge that we are facing in Latin America. More than 1/3 of the population does not have access to safe drinking water, and more than 2/3 do not have adequate excreta management. If we continue to invest and finance conventional solutions according to estimates by the Inter-American Development Bank, we would be reaching the SDGs until 2075. So we don't have time for this. In other words, current environmental, social, and economic models will not solve the challenges we face as humanity, and we need to multiply current rate of progress by 4. So knowing that our foundation's mission is to cultivate shared prosperity across Latin America for this and the next generation, after 14 years of continued investment in the water and sanitation sector, and knowing the size of the gap that we have, especially in this SDG number 6, we are convinced that disruptive innovation is crucial to bridge the gap in less time and at a lower cost. So for us, innovation must be first at the service of people, especially for the most vulnerable communities and those with the least access, and co-design with them and not only for them. So having a future and a systemic mindset and knowing that we work for the long term and with a long-term perspective is a mandate for us and a requirement for innovation. Committed to contribute to solve the root causes of water security in our region, our innovative finance strategy lies in three main pillars, Jason and all. So the first one is co-designing and piloting of potentially scalable financial models for what we enable the investment structures needed to create a positive impact in the scale and time frame needed in communities intervene. The second pillar is boosting business models that are both sustainable and have a relevant positive impact in alignment with our theory of change. And the third pillar is promoting behavioral and cultural change in an effective way, redefining the way we as humans relate with the resources we have and how we manage them. So to better understand how we are putting this into action, let me please share two examples. In Guanajuato, Mexico, the main challenge on water security is around agriculture, which, as we all know, is the sector with the highest water consumption. With our sustainable agriculture model, which we call SAM, we co-designed with farmers the Center of Water, which is a research institute, with investors, with water service providers, and the Water Fund of Guanajuato, which also we co-founded. We have found substantial water savings through sustainable agriculture practices. Our first results of the pilot show that in 1.3 thousand hectares intervened, we are getting savings of 2,000 cubic meters per hectare intervened. We're bringing water efficiency through the implementation of best practices to increase profitability and reduce cost to small producers. Some of these practices are the rotation of barley with high-value crops that already increased more than $7,000 per producer in a year, and also investing in technification for water savings of 4 cubic hectometer per 750 hectare, increasing profit over $3,000 per producer too. So while the concept is being proved, we keep on searching innovative financial solutions that will allow the model to be scalable, from pay for success models to some forms of water bonds. And the second example is the Source of Innovation initiative. Together with the Inter-American Development Bank, the governments of Switzerland, Israel, and Korea, and a leading private university in Latin America, the Tech of Monterrey, we co-created this innovation platform to strengthen the innovation ecosystem in our region in an integrated way, all across from finance to tech to social, digital, and governance, as I mentioned before. So from the financial perspective, our platform aims to boost lender finance as a key catalytic capital mechanism, and also to boost grant funding to seed the risk and help to structure and attract mainstream capital. So both by showing impact has been created by these financial mechanisms. In this way, we already brought, as you could see, financial capital from different sectors, the multilateral development banks, the governments, universities, corporates, and NGOs, aware that our $10 million facility at this stage will enable us to leverage hundreds that jointly will multiply the outreach. We are also aware the scarcity of demand.
Thank you,
Yes.
Lorena. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Just
Thank you.
If I can just 30 seconds.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much. With these two examples, I just want to show that only disruptive models with collective action make the difference. And we would love to invite more companies to join and combine efforts, and also to make a call to governments to deploy powerful policy and public financial management avenues to ensure this happens. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lorena, for your leadership and that call to action at the end. I'm going to hand over back to Emily now for our next two interviews.
Great. Thank you so much, Lorena. I'm going to turn now to Valerie Maison from the Down On Community Fund. And Valerie, you've got some really interesting work going on with the Incofin Water Access Fund. We'd really like to hear about Danone's investment in the Water Access Fund and the unique partnership model that Danone's had here, and some of the leadership, as Danone's long been a leader in the water space.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you everybody for inviting Danone to share its experience. So before moving into what we are doing with Incofin, I just want to come back to the history. In fact, Danone has been supporting water access since 2007. So 15 years ago already, Danone decided that it is its mission to help to give access to nutrition, but also to safe drinking water to the population. And so back in 2007 was created the Danone Communities Fund with an objective, indeed, to give access to low-income population, so the population between $2 PPP to $8 PPP, to have access to either safe nutrition or safe drinking. And this fund was quite at the forefront of
Valerie,
to invest, because it's what it is a fund where not fund, but also, can you hear me?
Valerie,
can you hear me?
We're having a little trouble on your end, unfortunately, on the internet side.
Okay. Okay.
Perhaps you could turn off your video.
Okay, I'll do that. So I hope it's better and that you can hear me. That's okay.
We can. Please continue. We lost you
yes.
when you were talking.
So sorry. I was thinking that Danone Communities.
Yes.
Okay. So I was saying that Danone Communities was quite interesting and innovative.
Valerie, unfortunately, we've lost you again. Maybe you can try resetting your connection, and in the meantime, let me go to David so that we can continue the conversation, and then we'll circle back to you. So David Flinton from Xylem, you're the Chief Innovation, Technology, and Products Officer, and yet you've tapped the capital markets through the Burnt Island Ventures Water Fund. Can you talk through us a little bit on your thought process there?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Emily, and thanks for the invite to share our journey here. We're really proud of what we're doing, and we're always happy to share that. What I'm going to talk about today is how we're engaging startups, venture capital, and revolving loan mechanisms to kind of accelerate the technology implementation for water resilience and climate change. But I'll start with who Xylem is. For those of you that may not be familiar with us, we're a global water technology and services provider. We're headquartered in Washington, D.C., and we've got operations across the world. We help customers across the whole cycle of water, so from source water to tap water, to really improve the resiliency of their infrastructure and reduce greenhouse gas emissions through our offering. We focus our R&D efforts on solutions that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, improve water resiliency, and our customer base is primarily water utilities and industry. It's a pretty energy intensive sector, a lot of numbers out there, but we estimate that the water sector accounts for up to 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And also by our estimates, we think that technology actually exists today to reduce that by up to 50%. We recognize, though, that we can't do it all on our own, can't develop those technologies inside of Xylem's own four walls, and we certainly can't be fast enough. And as others have said, I mean, we're behind the curve here and need to speed things up. So in addition to our traditional R&D work, research and development work, we have over time reallocated some of those R&D resources, about 10% of our R&D resources, to make external investments in water-focused venture capital funds. These aren't clean tech funds. There's a number of clean tech type funds on the market, but we think water deserves special focus, just given how many people are still lacking access to clean water, sanitation, and then I talked about the huge opportunity to just decarbonize the sector. And we think that technology can bridge a lot of those gaps. So we become the largest investor in what's called the Burnt Island Ventures Fund. That's an early stage venture capital fund, and their mission is to support the best founders and technologies in the sector. So these are founders and technologies that can really transform access to water, resilience of infrastructure, and decarbonization. So we support the early stage technology firms in that fund in order to accelerate kind of broader scale implementation of their solutions. And when that happens, you end up with a more significant impact on carbon emissions and resiliency of the sector. We think as Xylem, we can play a role in that. We're not passive investors in the fund. As I mentioned, we're a large global firm. We've got a significant geographic reach, capabilities, subject matter expertise. So what we try to do is be very active in finding ways to leverage all of that to help these firms accelerate their solutions. So we've got a dedicated team inside the company, leads these efforts. They play a really important role being that liaison between these kind of smaller, emerging, transformational technology companies and the broader market. And as we work with these companies, oftentimes we find out that their technology is can help our own portfolio. And so we enter into some sort of agreement to leverage their technology. And in doing that, we're essentially reducing the scope 3 emissions of our own portfolio, and that helps us achieve our net zero commitments. Just want to talk a little bit about adoption, because the technology development is only half of the challenge. Unless these things are implemented at scale, the impact is really muted. And so we also spend time working with partners to develop innovative mechanisms to accelerate that adoption curve. And one of these recent efforts is a partnership we kicked off with Isle Utilities. They're a UK-based water consultancy firm. And we're a founding member of a kind of a unique revolving loan fund called the Trial Reservoir. And what this does is it overcomes the barriers associated with paying for new technology implementation. And how it works is we give these water technology innovators access to capital for pilot projects. And pilot project is just a word for smaller scale implementations, really to test the effectiveness. And that reservoir of funding, it gets replenished from the proceeds of ongoing commercial contracts once the trials have moved into full deployment. And if the trials don't move into full deployment, that's okay. The cost is absorbed by the trial reservoir, not the startup or the customer. So pretty novel. It's a win-win for both the technology providers as well as the utilities. It reduced the risk of implementing new technology, and ultimately over time the pace of change and adoption of these breakthrough technologies is increased, and we all get to our water resiliency and greenhouse gas emission goals faster. So hopefully just a little bit of a sense of how we're making some innovative investments outside of our traditional R&D spend.
Thank you. Thank you so much, David. And Valerie, unfortunately, Valerie just wrote that her internet connection has in fact dropped. So we'll have to hear from Danone Communities and their Water Access Fund at another time. But we're happy to move now to our third fireside chat. And we have Paul O'Connell from Water Equity and Tom from the Nature Conservancy to share with us their innovative investment approaches to water sanitation and hygiene access and nature-based solutions. So we're going to start with you, Paul. You have been applying innovative approaches to leveraging the capital markets for water sanitation and hygiene access. So tell us about the journey that you've been on with Water Equity.
Yeah, thanks very much. And let me first say it's great to be able to join in on a platform like this and to hear the conversations. I think oftentimes we tend to focus on the scale of the problem that we face, and it sometimes can seem insurmountable, yet it's when you hear these different approaches that are being followed by folks on this platform and elsewhere that you gain a sense of optimism and encouragement. And I do think that's important. I think it's important that we think about the upsides and the opportunities that are present in this sector. It is an enormous sector, whether based on GHGs, as Dave said, or whether we think about the financial side. There is opportunity in this sector, and that's how we like to approach it. From the perspective of water equity, Una was kind enough to mention us already. Water equity is an asset manager that's 100% focused on the water and sanitation sector. That's all we do. And in particular, we focused on two things. We focused on the last mile of water and sanitation, and getting piped water and or safely managed sanitation facilities to those at the base of the economic pyramid. So much like Lorena mentioned, it's vital that we focus on those in the neediest stratum, and that's what we do. We're focused on those making less than $4 or $5 a day in PPP terms. We've succeeded in doing that by attracting money from the capital markets and making it available in funds, through funds into the microfinance avenue. And where that has brought us great success, we think, is that it engages the end beneficiaries in the process. It gives them ownership in the solution. They get to design the solution that makes the most sense for them, for their families, for their communities, for their environments. And in addition, they can think of it as an investment. So it is something that adds value to their homes, to their wealth. It gives them back hours of time. It gives them back hours of health-related savings, and it allows them to participate in the economic community. And so for us, it's been less about providing that gratis or making it available as a philanthropic donation. Instead, simply getting the financing to people to let them solve this problem for themselves, because they can and they will. They know how to. The financing comes for us from the capital markets, and we're raising our fourth fund now from accredited investors to put money to work there. But beyond that, we have, as you all know, as you've all talked about, the Climate Resilience Challenge. And here I think it's important to distinguish between two dimensions of climate resilience. There's what I would call the sort of slow burn, if you like, that where the temperature is slowly rising and we're seeing an incremental impact on water basins, on aquifers, on water availability, on water scarcity. And that's something that proceeds slowly but inexorably. And it's something that it's easy to take your eye off, but it's moving along. And that is one piece of resilience, because what we want to do is put in place infrastructure, not just at the last mile, but all the way back up to the utilities that will handle that change as it happens over time. The second piece of resilience is more what I would call the variance or the shock or the sudden event or the catastrophes that can happen. And as we've seen, we already mentioned earlier on what's happened in Bangladesh this year. Even in the US, we just had a hurricane come through Florida, Hurricane Ian, that compromised safe water availability for those in a developed market. It is very difficult to put in place infrastructure that's going to be resilient to all natural disasters and catastrophes, but it is important to do what you can when you're putting that infrastructure in place. And I think WaterAid and Water.org have both commented that water and sanitation services in Bangladesh, for the most part, were built to withstand 3 to 4 feet of flooding, but not the extent of flooding that actually came through in Bangladesh. So we're also engaged in that. We're looking to funnel capital from the capital markets and bring it into new investments in water and sanitation, both on the utility side, the build, operate, and transfer model, and into growth companies, similar to Burnt Island, where we see innovative opportunities to bring capital from the capital markets to that place.
Thank you, Paul. And so I think a great example of the development of new mechanisms for water and water resilience, and turning now also to Tom on the nature side, the Nature Conservancy and your department Nature Vest have been applying very innovative approaches also in helping to establish new investment mechanisms for water and nature-based solutions. Tell us about your journey.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Tom Meisman. I'm with the Nature Conservancy. We're a conservation organization, a nonprofit. We work on the conservation of lands and waters so people and nature can thrive. We're in over 70 countries. And I work on water scarcity, drought resilience, and water and food issues for the Nature Conservancy. But I'm going to talk today about the Sustainable Water Impact Fund, or the SWIF as we call it. And it's one example of TNC's work to catalyze nature-based solutions through an innovative investment mechanism. And so as background, in 2019, the Nature Conservancy and RRG Capital Management launched the Sustainable Water Impact Fund. We have very clear rules in the fund. RRG are the impact investing group. They manage the fund. They own, manage, and develop agriculture and water assets in the US and internationally. The Nature Conservancy, on the other hand, is the technical advisor to the fund. We provide conservation guidance in the selection of assets, and we help with the ecological design of the projects and the evaluation of conservation outcomes through the investments. And we've paid close attention to the governance of the fund. We have a technical advisory committee with third-party review, and very clear about the roles and responsibilities of the partners in the fund. So we launched the fund in 2019. By 2020, the SWIF had raised over $900 million to invest in land and water assets. And the goal of the fund is to generate environmental impact alongside competitive financial returns by investing in these land and water assets. And often these end up being agricultural assets. And the investments are in California, Australia, Chile, and Peru, and some other similar countries or settings. And from an investment perspective, the fund is often investing in these similar kind of Mediterranean food production systems. We see a lot of fruits, nuts, and vegetables. But really, that's the domain of RRG, is looking at the investment opportunities and the synergies across the geographies. From a conservation perspective and what's of interest to the Nature Conservancy, these are hydroclimatically similar regions. They're often water scarce areas in need of conservation and stewardship of the water resources. So we see an opportunity to use nature-based solutions to address water risk in these places, both risk to the farms and the farm operations and production, but as well to ecosystems and providing opportunities to restore ecosystems and conservation values. And so as one example of what the SWIF is invested in, there's a project in Caponero Creek in the Central Valley of California. Many of you may know that most of California's Central Valley is critically overdrafted. This is terminology under the state's Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which was designed to regulate and limit groundwater extraction to provide sustainable aquifers essentially in the Central Valley. And so the Sustainable Water Impact Fund has acquired a farm that at the time it was an active dairy and feed crop farm. The fund acquired the farm and established a groundwater recharge facility, which takes surface water irrigation deliveries and percolates them into the ground for future use. And when filled, the recharge basin is managed in a way that replicates the ecological conditions of a temporary wetland. And it provides habitat for migratory birds, many of which are of interest for conservation purposes and need additional wetland habitats to sustain them. So there's a conservation benefit as well as this water supply resilience and sustaining the aquifer and providing for future water supply uses. As I mentioned, the SWIF is doing similar investment projects around the world, looking to use nature-based solutions to provide conservation benefits alongside the investment returns. And other examples of the kinds of practices the SWIF can deploy would be watershed protection, the use of downstream water transfers to keep water in stream longer, or doing conservation transactions to set aside lands for habitat. And so we see a clear complementarities between RRG as the impact-oriented investors and the Nature Conservancy as the conservation advisors to the fund. And ultimately, our theory is that we want to create a proof point that conservation outcomes can coexist with investment returns through the strategic use of nature-based solutions in agriculture and water. And in that way, we can influence the wider investment and management space and increase the uptake of these practices and the ecosystem and resilience co-benefits that they provide. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. And I see that, Valerie, you've been able to join us again. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes. Wonderful. We're running slightly out of time, Valerie, but we do have about 2 minutes, if that's okay. If you could give us, we'd love to at least have a high-level introduction to the Danone Incofin Water Access Fund.
Definitely, and thank you. So we are launching this year with Incofin a new fund, which is called a Water Access Acceleration Fund, recognizing that we need to go faster and have a wider impact on water access. So Danone will be the anchor investor of this fund. And as it was mentioned in the introduction, I mean, corporates cannot do everything on their own. So this fund is extremely innovative in a way that it will be solely dedicated to safe drinking water, so giving access to safe drinking water. It will be an impact-first fund, so it means that first, the fund needs to reach an impact before return on investment, and it will be blended finance. So around the table, we are calling to have corporates, to have Bank of Developments and other institutions, and we are proud to announce that we are at maybe in 2 weeks' time, we will sign the first closing at roughly more than 35 million euros with 3 banks of development, some corporates and financial institutions. And the objective of the fund is to reach 50 million euro. So there is place for corporates and other institutions to join for the second raise. And the objective is to reach by 2030, 30 million people living between $2 PPP to $8 PPP to give access to safe drinking water. So to invest in sustainable businesses that give access to safe drinking water. So if anybody wants to be part of the second round of capital increase, please reach out to us or Incofin, which is the fund manager of this fund.
Great. Thank you, Valerie. So thank you all for sharing with us your innovations in investing in water and water resilience. And now for a close, I want to invite up our keynote speakers once again to share some final reflections. And as they're joining the stage, I think what we've heard here from across companies, asset managers, fund managers, and NGOs and foundations who are starting to be innovative in going beyond their own practices of water efficiency and water resilience in their own operations to also making significant investments through the capital markets. So I'd like to start off with Emily to share with us your reflections. This is the power of collaboration, how we might collaborate with the private sector and banks on investments in water.
Well, it's always very inspiring to hear all the different perspectives that are here, and I think I've got 3 takeaways. One is that there are different angles and different facets, which is we've looked at it from agriculture, technology, infrastructure, and there's definitely the overlay of impact, and corporates are moving quickly. Bringing in that lens of expertise, particularly from practitioners in the field, is very critical. And I would encourage people to rely on their expertise and be creative within the bounds of the existing structures of the capital markets, because we heard from from David, from Water Equity, from others, that can be successful, and there's room for that to scale.
Yeah, thanks a lot also for this very insightful inputs from our colleagues. Indeed, learned quite a lot. And in terms of how it transfers to our work, maybe just to continue what I mentioned, as we all basically, I think, learned today, it's impossible to have sustainable water solutions without and climate resilient solutions without private sector investment. Public money is not enough for that. So we need to really create models, business models which work, which are scalable, replicable. And at the GCF, we are trying to do that. And just maybe another project I wanted to mention is a green guarantee company that we set up together with MUFG Bank, which actually provides guarantees for climate bonds issuers in developing countries. And we came with the initial slightly more than 40 million initial equity to this fund, and MUFG will bring more than 300 million of private sector investment into this fund. So basically really bring together and create an ecosystem for issuers in developed countries and investors, private sector investors. So this is, I think, also quite interesting and really relating also to Starbucks' experience with the green bonds. I think was also something wanted to relate to. And overall, of course, we hear a lot today about water being a valuable asset. So this is also how we see it at GCF, that this water is a new class asset, basically, that needs to be valued, and its value in also the supply chains and value chains should be valued, and only by understanding the true value of water, we can actually make a change, and also in terms of climate impact. Thank you.
Thank you. So those that have worked with me before will know that I characterize myself as being a pathological optimist, and it's, I think, a skill you need to have if you're going to be in the sustainability space. But I would agree quite emphatically with Paul that this was a very inspiring session, actually. I feel like the historic discussions we've had on water stewardship are incrementally oriented or incremental thinking, project-based, and some of these areas of investment and innovation seem like the unlock that was going to really accelerate the types of changes that are needed in the scaling of the investments that are needed. So I take a lot of inspiration from that in this meeting. I do know there are multiple pathways here, and many of the leading companies that we have worked with within the CO Water mandate have been investing in water outside of their own operations for a lot of years now. Most of that has been expense or philanthropy, but increasingly recognizing that that's not sufficient to the scope of the problem and the need to think more cleverly about how to invest in these water resilience solutions at a scale that is necessary. I also take comfort from the fact that the last two COPs now, there's been a real political recognition of the need to upscale our investments in the climate adaptation side of the equation. Those of us in the water sector have been saying that for a long time, but I get the sense now there's really a growing number of stakeholders that are hearing that message and are ready to act on it. So I hope those that have been at today's session are able to get some insight that they can take action on afterwards. I heard 4 out of our 6 speakers talk about the opportunity to collaborate with them as they're moving forward with what they're doing. So plenty of opportunity to join forces going forward. And then I just want to conclude by thanking the people that made this possible. In particular, Cheryl and Ilse, my colleagues. There are also some colleagues that are not here with us in person, but online, like Ian Hoyt and Mark, that have enabled this session to take place. So thank you to those partners. Thank you to our panelists and those who are joining for us remotely, and appreciate your willingness to take time out of your busy schedules to be with us today for this discussion. And then thanks to our audience here today in the room, and also those tying in virtually to be a part of this session. It was a fantastic discussion, and I hope we can take action on it going forward.